like to begin tonight's talk with a story. It begins this way. Far, far away, in a country now lost in the mists of time, an old king and a queen lived, and their son, a young prince, was proficient in the matters of war, clever in affairs of state, and self-centered, disinterested in people's troubles, impatient and headstrong. So the king and queen were worried. The king was old, he was ailing, the queen's concerned about the care of the kingdom, so they went to a sorcerer and told him their concerns. And his response was, "What is he really like? What's he passionate about?" And they said, "Not much, maybe horses, that's about it." That's all they could think of. He said, "That'll do." So he told the queen to bring the prince to the palace gardens the following day. He did so, and at the end of the gardens, beautiful white horse was awaiting the young prince. So of course the prince wanted it and immediately was saying, "How much?" That kind of thing. The sorcerer said, "First, can you ride it?" And of course, with all the hubris in the world, he jumped on and galloped away. And he began to gallop faster and faster and faster. He was thrilled out to the surrounding farmlands and into the hills and high into the mountains and over passes. And the horse didn't tire, and the prince didn't tire. And finally, they slowed down for a walk. They're in this deep forest. And he realizes, whoops, I'm lost. So comes upon a small cottage, and of course there's a beautiful young woman who comes to the door and answers it, and she's never heard of the kingdom. So he stays over that night. The father is a woodcutter and welcomes him warmly. Next morning he sets out to find his way home, and he asks every person he runs into, but anybody he asks has never heard of the kingdom he comes from. Happens day after day after day. Eventually, he starts helping the old man with his work and cutting the wood, and he started growing wise in the ways of the forest. Attracted to the daughter, so they married and took on a new life, took on the trade. He gave birth to a son and daughter and kind of took over the family business. Simple life, took care of their needs, lived happily, peacefully, and the memories of his former life faded. He'd often walk in the forest, and on one walk he walked into a glen that had a beautiful, beautiful deep pond, and he'd visit that regularly. Well, one day he heard a cry, and his two children come running out of the forest. They're chased by a tiger, and before he could do anything, the children ran into the pond and they disappeared. And the tiger jumped in and disappeared. And then his wife, who was running up after them, also jumped in and disappeared. And his horse galloped up and leaped into the pond and disappeared. And then the waters stilled, and they were very clear, and there was no trace of his family, his horse, anything. So in the space of 2 minutes, everything in his life had vanished. The shock of the loss came over him, and he fell to the ground, sobbing, crying. And he felt a hand softly touching his shoulder. And he looked up, and he looked into the eyes of his mother, the queen, and the concerned faces of others from the court. The palace gardens, the horse was standing quietly right there. The queen was very relieved. She told him that as soon as he had climbed onto the horse, he'd just fallen to the ground, and he had been lying there in trance for 2 to 3 minutes. 2 to 3 minutes? No, cried the prince. It wasn't minutes, it was years. I had a life, I had a family, I had a trade, people I loved, a wife, 2 children. I had things that mattered to me. I lived my whole life. It wasn't 2 to 3 minutes, it's not possible. Dazed and bewildered, he stood and he walked away. The old man bowed to the queen, took the horse and left. So the prince was profoundly altered by the loss and by the mystery, and his attitude changed. His heart opened to every moment of his life. After his father, the king, died, he ruled wisely and well, attentive and caring about the welfare of his kingdom. So that's our story. So one of the great truths in spiritual living is that we can't open fully to this life that's right here if we're in any way ignoring or warding off the truth of impermanence, of mortality, of death. That this living world is absolutely hand in hand with this world that passes away. This is probably one of the core truths in all spiritual paths, that if we're not awake to the reality of impermanence and change, and when I say awake, not conceptually, but in a very visceral way, we can't fully give ourselves to the moments. So it's interesting if you imagine if all your important decisions, if all your responses to dear ones, if all the choices you made were in some way informed by the brevity and the mystery and the preciousness of moments. So in Buddhism, this is called, this changing world, the Pali words anicca. And in many spiritual traditions, just opening to this reality of change, of the arising and passing, is portal to the deepest wisdom we can touch. In fact, if we really understand impermanence, we are heir to all the blessings of living and loving fully. These are the teachings that we're exploring tonight. So I was kind of scanning the different materials I have and the practices, and I always know whenever I am, kind of honing in on the subject material that my own practice, that's where I'm, paying attention. And of course, things come to me that seem to be relevant, and I'm going to read you one thing that I received in the email tonight, and you can decide whether it's relevant. This is a Buddhist question-answer. How many Zen Buddhists does it take to change a light bulb? None. They are the light bulb. How many does it take to change a light bulb? Just asking it again. 3, 1 to change it, 1 to not change it, and 1 to both change and not change it. That's typical Buddhism. How many Zen Buddhists does it take to change a light bulb? Tree falling in the forest. How many Buddhists does it take to find a missing light bulb? 4 noble sleuths. So was that relevant or not? Probably not, but it did come my way. So here's the inquiry for us, and we'll be, of course, exploring the layers of this. How many of you would say that you've had very big changes and losses that have dramatically shifted your perspective in life, have changed how your heart relates to life? How many has that really been one of the portals? So for those listening, mostly everybody. We know that. There's so many stories. This came to me today. This was in a lawyer's journal, ABA journal. The call came on Friday afternoon, the kind of news nobody wants to hear, but Timothy Tosta, then 41, and a partner in Baker and McKenzie San Francisco office, missed the call, and it wasn't until the following Monday that he learned he had melanoma. The doctor told Tosta that he had maybe 2 years. It was time to put his affairs in order. That was the part he didn't tell his wife or their 3 children right away. What came next wasn't death, but surgeries, personal introspection, and ultimately, against the odds, survival, and a quiet transformation. He began reading psychology, philosophy, and comparative religion. He rediscovered music. Yoga and meditation followed, then volunteer hospice work, and gradually a new level of mindfulness, all while continuing to develop his career as a respected land use attorney. As it turned out, the new approach made him a calmer, more compassionate, more focused lawyer. I think I maybe hear stories with this theme. Just a moment. Yeah, I hear stories with this theme of the wake-ups, maybe more than any other kind of story. Another recent one was a friend's mother who had a heart attack, and the gratitude she had, she said that she felt she wasn't skimming the surface, she was arriving in her life. Knowing that she could go at any time made the moments rich. She said previously it had seemed like there was this endless stretch that she was just passing on by. She was just living in this endless stretch, but not there. So as it said in the Carlos Castaneda books, when death makes even the slightest gesture, all the pettiness falls away. We see clearly. And then what happens? We forget, right? I mean, how many of us, I asked for hand raised before, had an amazing sense of waking up from something like that and know that the forgetting is thick? Can I just see by hands? Yeah. We wake up and we fall asleep again, which is why this reflection, this exploration of tonight is considered to be such a key portal in spiritual life, a key entry. So while it's often not in our consciousness, humans have a kind of unique awareness of all the other animals of death, of change. We're able to sense the future and we're able to apprehend it, its inevitability. And there are two implications, and it's really interesting to me that one of the implications of that apprehension of what's going to happen is our survival system's more revved up. We're more charged, we're more anxious, we have bigger death fear. So we get more violent and more fearful. And it leads us to behaving in ways that then making it so we're not there for our life. And then, of course, the other implication of being uniquely aware of death is spiritual awakening. So let's look at the first one, at how that awareness can end up deepening the trance. And the understanding is that impermanence means that all the moments that you're here, all the moments through today, all the moments tomorrow, there's an unending experience of pleasantness or unpleasantness or neutrality, but they keep on shifting around. And our system is designed to want to hold on to pleasantness. We want to hold on to life. And our system is designed to want to push away unpleasantness. We want to avoid loss and death. And so what that means, we are perpetually in reaction. We're perpetually trying to get more comfortable. We're perpetually feeling a restlessness and tensing against things. The core experience is wanting things a certain way and resisting the change. If it's pleasant, we're resisting having it go away. If it's unpleasant, we're resisting feeling it. We're resisting change. Now, it comes through, it expresses in a very central kind of experience that most of us have, I think, which is not enough time. Now, I know some people that say there's too much time. I'm kind of like floating in too much time. But for most of us, there's a sense of there's not enough time to get what I want. This undercurrent, that time's slipping away, it's running out, that we need to get something done, we need to get what we want, we need to beat the clock. There's something very curious about how we get about missing planes. And in a way, it's like missing a plane is as deep an experience. It touches into that sense that we're going to miss life, that life's going to go on without us. That our plan, our trajectory, where we're going, we're no longer on that one. We've kind of disconnected from our route. So this not enough time means that we try to collect and accumulate and consume and get enough. There's kind of a drivenness about it. It's like the squirrel that's storing all the acorns, but we don't get around to really enjoying. There's no resting and feeling satisfied. There's rarely a sense of enough, like this moment is enough. So check it out. Again, these are the kind of teachings about how it is with impermanence, that we have a sense of not enough and we're constantly leaning in. One of the early letters to the Insight Meditation Society, to IMS, was addressed to the Instant Meditation Society. It's like, make it happen fast, you know. So we're rushing on to what's next, and we're racing past what's here. And there's an impatience with what's here. You know. Woody Allen, life is full of misery, loneliness, and suffering, and it's all over much too soon, you know. So that's one dimension, this discontent, where we want the next moment to contain what this moment does not. And there's a story from, this is from Zorba the Greek, that really touches me on this theme. I remember one morning when I discovered a cocoon in the bark of a tree, just as the butterfly was making a hole in its case and preparing to come out. I waited a while, but it was long in appearing, and I was impatient. I bent over it and breathed on it to warm it. I warmed it as quickly as I could, and the miracle began to happen before my eyes, faster than life. The case opened, the butterfly started slowly crawling out, and I shall never forget my horror when I saw how its wings were folded back and crumpled. The wretched butterfly tried with its whole trembling body to unfold them. Bending over it, I tried to help it with my breath. In vain. It needed to be hatched out patiently, and the unfolding of the wings needed to be a gradual process in the sun. Now it was too late. My breath had forced the butterfly to appear all crumpled before its time. It struggled desperately, and a few seconds later died in the palm of my hand. That little body is, I do believe, the greatest weight I have on my conscience. For I realize today that it is a mortal sin to violate the greatest laws of nature. We should not hurry. We should not be impatient. But we should confidently obey the eternal rhythm. So one way that we deepen the trance is we perceive impermanence and we take it as there's not enough time, I need to rush, I need to get more, I need to, consume more, I need to do more. The other version of not enough time is there's not enough time and I'm on my way to trouble and I have to prepare more so something bad doesn't happen. Does that one resonate for you? The sense of having to prepare ourselves? I'm very aware of that one because, and I think anybody that has certain deadlines is that there's a sense of something very bad can go wrong if we're not ready. And so there's this inner pressure, and it's never, the consequences are never so bad, but we have it associated with the ultimate thing we're avoiding, which is death, loss, the big losses. So in some way we're living with that same kind of motor or hum in us that's very, very anxious about not having it together, not being prepared. So we have this thing about our to-do list. There's a really big thing about being able to check things off. I was aware in the last few days, I sent out a few emails, one to my sister, one to Janet, saying, is such and such taken care of? And what I got back was just the word done. And I realized done was my favorite four-letter word, you know. Story that Jonathan passed on. An old man's dying, and he smells coming up from the kitchen below apple pie that his wife had made. So he tells his grandson to go downstairs and ask his wife to bring him a piece. And the child comes back and says, "Sorry, Grandpa, she's saving it for the funeral service tomorrow." So you get the idea that our to-do list, the things that we're afraid we're not going to be ready for, take such precedent that we're really not able to remember what matters. This is the trance. This is the way. This is the shadow side of impermanence. I think the piece of research that for me was most compelling about this one was that Good Samaritan study that Princeton did, and many of you will remember it, where the seminarians were given a practice sermon, and half of them were given the sermon of the Good Samaritan, half of them were given another Bible story. And then they were supposed to go to another building to give the sermon, but on the way to that other building, there was somebody on the ground kind of moaning in distress. So the real question for the study was, will the seminarian stop to help? Okay? And it was determined by how much time they thought they had before they had to give their sermon. If they believed they'd be late, they didn't stop to help. And that this was true even for those given the Good Samaritan talk. I mean, think of that. Here you are. It's like I'm on my way to the class to give a talk about generosity and kindness, and so on. I'm cutting off people on the beltway. It's that. That didn't happen today. So again, we're talking about how our survival system reacts to the threat and feeling of impending loss, and the biggest way is denial. That our biggest mechanism is to turn our attention away from that reality so that we don't have to open to what is so painful. From the mouth of children, here we have a story. It says, the children had all been photographed and the teacher was trying to persuade them each to buy a copy of the group picture. Just think how nice it'll be to look at it when you're all grown up. There's Jennifer, she's a lawyer. That's Michael, he's a doctor. A small voice at the back of the room rang out, and there's the teacher, she's dead. So denial is a actually important mechanism, and we need it at times. It helps us to be functional, to put aside certain things so we can operate. But because we do it in such a blanket way, it deprives us of the reality that gives us access to the deepest wisdom and love. And it also, by not paying attention to the reality of loss, not grieving loss, not facing the truth of the brevity of life, it makes it so we can't respond intelligently and compassionately to what's right here. So what happens? I mean, if you think of it this way, and I can describe what happens when we don't grieve. I've seen so many people who have gone through something and known they weren't really touching in, and at some later point sensing what happened from not touching in. I think of one client, and I wrote about this in True Refuge, whose wife was killed in a car accident, and he felt so angry and so betrayed by God that he just threw himself in a very kind of enraged way into social action. And it was ostensibly good work. And he brought so much anger into it that he really alienated all his allies. I think of another couple, and this one I wrote about too, And after a real long struggle with leukemia, this is a local couple, their child died. Many, many tests, worked NIH and so on. They went through a lot. And in her distress at having lost her son, she just in some way blamed her husband for not saving his life. It was, not rational. But rather than fully grieving, it was blame. So anger, so blame. Thinking of another couple that got divorced, and rather than really processing the grief, there was a hardening against each other that the children felt and suffered from. The reality is we all instinctively armor against the full rawness of loss. The big thing we're avoiding in life is the pain and fear of loss. That's the big one. So we all have the habit of armoring, which is why it's so important to pay attention, because in that armoring against loss, current loss, future loss, we're unable to really respond to what's here, and we're unable to be intimate with ourselves or others. When we're blocking off rawness, we're blocking off our heart. We see it collectively in ways that really are horrific. We can see in the cycles of wars how over and over again there'll be killing, there'll be one side experiencing loss, and then the anger and hatred, reprisals, and so on, and it just keeps cycling. I love that teaching that vengeance is a lazy form of grief. That if we don't grieve what's here, it's going to come out in all sorts of contorted ways. And then there's the denial around the suffering of our planet. Perhaps the denial that is most causing widespread suffering. Here we have the changing of climate, the destruction of species, of ecosystems, environmental systems. The hugest suffering is to the poorest and most vulnerable on our planet. A few days ago in the newspaper, there was one headline that said, in China, breathing a childhood risk. Some of you might have seen that. I mean, if we're adapting in our minds to the awfulness of what's happening on the planet, that's denial. So what happens is it feels so huge, it feels so out of our hands, so hard to control, that we push aside, we can't go into that despair. And yet avoiding it, not grieving it, means that we don't actually respond in the ways that we can best respond. So we violate the very life that needs our protection. So, our survival system is rigged to resist change. We apprehend it in the background, we're rigged to resist. And, here's the other side of it, we also are gifted with a consciousness that can begin to notice that. Notice the suffering that comes from it. Notice how it keeps us from wholeness and keeps us from connection, and begin to deepen our attention. So this is the essence of the Buddhist teachings, which is that it's a given that there is suffering. Impermanence, life, death keeps happening. There's going to be tension and stress and pain around that. That's a given. Okay. The second truth is we lock into that suffering when we resist it. It's that simple. If we don't open to it, if we resist it, deny it, control it, whatever it is, we lock in. We're in trance. And the hope and possibility is waking up our attention and saying, okay, I'm choosing to be here. I'm choosing to open to this mystery, this rawness, to dying and to living. That's where the possibility comes. The process of opening is letting go of resistance. It's kind of relaxing the armor. Ajahn Chah put it this way. He said, if you let go a little, you'll find a little peace. If you let go a lot, you'll find a lot of peace. If you let go absolutely, you'll find absolute peace and tranquility. So the process of waking up is one of noticing where we are tense, noticing where we're avoiding, noticing where we're fighting or flighting, noticing that and beginning to bring a very soft, open attention. Now, I just want to comment here that letting be, let's say we notice that there's loss going on in our life and that something very injurious is going on that's causing that loss. Letting be doesn't mean that we don't respond to what's going on in our life. It's not a passive kind of surrender. It means that we put down our resistance to feeling the rawness so we're free to respond from the depth of our intelligence and compassion. Accepting the reality that our planet is suffering is not a passive act. It means that we're acknowledging in our hearts the pain of it. It's what'll give us the juice to respond. So what I'd like to do is, for the last part of this talk, is explore 3 key domains where we can begin to wake ourselves up around impermanence, where we can begin to let go in a way that taps us into our deepest wisdom and deepest compassion.